Welcome to Selling Circular, the podcast dedicated to exploring the innovative minds and ideas shaping our transition to a circular economy. I'm Garr Punnett, CEO of LoopLayer.
I'm Sabira Lakhani, VP of Product at Reaply. In today's episode, we discuss the essential yet often overlooked aspect of sustainability, the role of nonprofits in accepting material donations and fostering reuse economies.
Shannon Goodman is the co-founder of the Lifecycle Building Center and a passionate advocate for material reuse. Nonprofits like the Lifecycle Building Center, or LBC for short, serve a unique purpose in addressing a market gap. Our modern economy faces significant challenges in valuing reusable materials due to underdeveloped processes, insufficient policies, and often lagging consumer behavior.
By diverting waste from landfills and making salvage materials accessible, LBC empowers communities to save money, reduce environmental impact, and build resilience. The work isn't just about sustainability, it's about creating stronger connections between people and fostering collaboration across industries. Based in Atlanta, the Lifecycle Building Center exemplifies this mission, and since its inception since 2011, LBC has been a hub for salvaging and redistributing building materials, and they support local projects and nonprofits and organizations through their work. They have helped countless property owners reduce costs while contributing to the overall environmental stewardship goals.
Can you remember the last sort of building material center you've been to?
No?
Yeah, that's fair. I can't think of one by you in sort of the New Jersey area, so I'd be curious if we can somehow find one. I was actually just able to visit Shannon in Atlanta, and so I was able to see the space and walk around the warehouse. It is hard, but it's not that hard. We need space to aggregate materials, to sell to people who want to buy them. And so it's really that transparent of a process of reclaiming these building materials. But it was really interesting to see the amount of volume that came back. There was, I think, a large, I won't name drop them. I think, you know what, I'll say it. I don't think McDonald's, I think, donated a bunch of these benches that were gorgeous, sort of that kind of bent plywood type of bench that is kind of like a nice whitish wood color or neutral wood tone color with some great sort of like almost iron base to it. And there were like 400 of them like sitting and they were trying to find the next home for these benches. And they were really cool looking, but it just takes that place to be able to sit for them to find their next use. And so hopefully someone might find that of interest in the Atlanta area. But beyond their impact in Atlanta, LBC also represents a broader network of organizations doing exactly what I just referenced. They are in cities and are vital to advancing the reuse infrastructure and practices nationwide. And they are proof that reuse is not only practical, but can also be deeply rooted, as Sabira said earlier, in community building and really connecting people to assets and each other. So in this conversation, Shannon shares her insights on the challenges and opportunities within reuse. From workforce development into fostering partnerships across industries, Shannon's perspective highlights how reuse can really unite this diverse set of stakeholders and really drive that meaningful change. Join us as we explore her story, the impact of LBC in Atlanta, and what lies ahead for the future of circularity.
But first, we want to acknowledge our first Selling Circular partner, Circularity, presented by Trellis Group. Hey Circular Squad, we're teaming up with our friends at Trellis Group to bring you the inside scoop on the hottest event in circular economy, Circularity 2025 in Denver.
If you're getting CES vibes, think about that, except instead of the Consumer Electronics Show, we've actually got 3 days of circular economy solutions. It's why we love Circularity, not just because it's the preeminent proving ground for circular economy breakthroughs, but also it's because where we actually meet many of our podcast guests for the first time. And they actually end up becoming friends.
Which we love. So from April 29th to May 1st, Colorado Convention Center is going to be buzzing with innovators, policy movers and shakers, and circularity changemakers. And if you're there in person or online, our partnership with the Trellis Group has got you covered. So when you join in person, you're going to have inspiring keynotes, actionable workshops, and the ability to share great meals with industry colleagues. And then, of course, you can take those learnings back to your team. And if you're joining online, we've also partnered with Circularity to bring you live inside content from the conference.
You get to see Sabira behind the scenes, working the interviews. So use code C25podcast at registration for 15% off passes. But hurry, because again, as the conference gets closer, the prices go up. So grab your reusable coffee cup, rally that team, because we're all about building this future together. One reclaimed polymer / one circular partnership at a time.
See you in Denver.
I'm so excited to have you back, not on our podcast of the Selling Circular podcast, but you originally were joining Sabira and I on Sabira and I's first co-hosting opportunity with the Multi-Useverse podcast at Circularity 22, one of my favorite episodes because it was so pretty. Like the venue we were in was this sort of serene. So thank you for rejoining us.
Sure.
It's been a joy to get to know you and the organizations you serve of Build Reuse, but then also the Lifecycle Building Center. I would love to start out really just then having the audience be reintroduced to you through a little bit of your story of how you got into the Lifecycle Building Center. My question is really rooted in essentially a moment of courage where you were at Perkins and Will, in which you were really talking about material salvage and trying to think through different elements of material salvage from the angle of architects and architecture. What about some of those experiences convinced you that the route you should go down is founding a nonprofit dedicated to this deconstruction, salvage, and reuse mission that we are now so ingrained in, or at least I am, in terms of topic material, because I'm just so fascinated with this reuse economy that we're just trying to really forward, either through Reaply or what I'm working on now. Can you talk a little bit about that with the audience?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. And what's interesting about your question is that, in a sense, that journey and its foundation is really quite simple. And what I mean by that is it's also one of the things that I love the most about being a part of this movement and this industry is that it's just very practical. So the journey began really with, I guess, an awakening and realizing that things were broken. And I don't mean that in like a judgmental way, but just a sense that something had been lost or something was disconnected. If you think about, historically, how commonplace it's been to reuse materials, the root of that is really, around being able to recognize the value and basically appreciating things that already exist and seeing them, meaning like seeing a deeper truth in those materials, right? And so I guess, for me personally, there is a direct link between getting involved in starting Lifecycle Building Center, which I have to correct something just to make sure it's clear. I certainly didn't do alone in terms of having an entire community of, very passionate people participate in that process, but I also had a co-founder. So this was not something that I was doing by myself. So the connection for me personally to the beginning of that journey came out of yoga. It came out of the fact that the year that I had the opportunity to get involved in the Perkins and Will project that led me to all the people that started Lifecycle Building Center was the same year that I trained to become a yoga teacher. And I guess, again, like just to put it simply, seeing more of that truth in my world as an architect, in that one project, in the bigger picture of how we treat materials was absolutely tied to seeing a deeper truth within myself, seeing the way that we are all connected as a species, seeing and appreciating more the connection, not just of us to one another, but to the world that we inhabit together. And so this is all connected for me.
I love that mindfulness aspect to this. And that truthfully for me, and this is what I always tell folks, and I've probably said it on the podcast, there's a moment that comes where you can't unsee that truth. And there's a moment where you start to connect some dots in material reuse, in our inefficiencies in the systems we've set up, or at least the economies that we've set up, or the systems that sort of we structure around our economies, where you're like, oh, that is kind of broken. And it's not so hard to fix. And it's almost so inherent to all of us that even when you tell people, oh, this is what I'm doing, they go, don't we do that already? It's like, no, we don't do that already. And so that's what we're trying to solve. And so I love that aspect of that.
Absolutely. The thing I was thinking also when you were saying all of that, Garr, was, I guess it's a matter of asking ourselves, what do we value? Because reuse is not just about the economic value. And, I guess for me, the thing that I've become the most passionate about, and I've been thinking about it even more in today's environment, is the way that reuse as a practice makes communities stronger, in part by connecting people to each other and oftentimes connecting pieces and parts of our community that might not otherwise think of themselves as connected. It creates an opportunity for, different components of our communities to also see and appreciate each other in a different way because they are part of this common process that feels good, right? And to me, that is so exciting. We need
Sabira,
more. I feel like we need anywhere we can get it. We need more of that, right?
That so reminds me of Stephanie Phillips' quote that we loved on the podcast, that you can't build communities around landfill. And that, again, that speaks to that element of both the intent, like what literally you can't, nobody wants to be hanging around a landfill, but also the magic that happens when you bring people to a reuse center or some type of material reuse event, and the connections that happen for neighbors and for communities.
Yeah, even Tessa.
Excited about.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sabira.
No, I was just saying, even Tessa from Chicago Tool Library had that same kind of ethos, which is you're hinting at, Shannon, is also like resilience is there, that there's, once you have those connections, and you can also rely on each other in times of need and struggle, and the tool library kind of unlocked that. And I'm sure you've seen that at the Lifecycle Building Center as well.
Yeah. A few years ago, I just kind of had this, I don't know, epiphany, I guess, that I remember a long time ago, Bill Reed from, I think, Regenesis is his company, presented at a Living Future conference. And it was the first time, this was early on when I was at Perkins and Will, that somebody talked about the fundamental, I guess, natural law that like nature doesn't make waste. And it just got me thinking over the years of part of why I think reuse does feel good is because of the way in which it taps into something that in our day-to-day lives we may not even be conscious of, which is that, as species on this planet, and we are, all part of the same stuff, and that there is something that does connect us. I think the act of reuse literally reminds us of that connection to the natural world, that we are a part of it. And I get really, and I'm not saying, anyway, I don't want to necessarily get into, anything like overtly, I'm not trying to politicize any of what I'm saying around, like environmental sustainability. I'm just literally saying that we as, human beings, there is a connection to the world that sustains us. And, it's just, again, it's very common sense that we should support, those things need to support each other.
So tell us about that transition from Perkins and Will to Lifecycle Building Center. I don't know anything about that firm also. So you're kind of hinting at that there's like moments of inspiration or maybe like a significant project there that helped your transition. So yeah, what was that kind of like?
Sure. So back in 2009, I had been at Perkins and Will for probably a couple of years, and they were on this journey to figure out their new office space. They had outgrown their current building, explored a lot of options, and they ended up finding an existing building. It was only a block away from where our current office was, and it was a 5-story office building constructed in the 80s. They ultimately decided to buy it and renovate it to become the new Atlanta Perkins and Will office. And it was a really fortunate confluence of events for me. And I guess for, Atlanta in a way, because of leading to launch Lifecycle Building Center, because I, at that time, was part of the Perkins and Will Green Team. And these were people in each office that, worked across the whole firm. And we're really trying to position everyone in the company to better understand not only the benefits of adopting more sustainable actions and practices in our day-to-day work, but
I always like hearing the Green Team moniker. We don't hear that anymore. It's always gone. But that was like such an original moniker for that mission. So again, always good feel there.
I was just a little Green Team worker in the Atlanta office. Like that's literally what it was.
Yeah.
And went through this yoga teacher training and found myself being invited to go see this 5-story space, 50,000 square foot, Class A office building. They had actually, Perkinsville had already, they already had a contractor on board. That contractor had already awarded the demolition subcontract, and we're walking the space, and next thing I know, I'm asking questions about, gosh, there's some beautiful stuff in here. Is our only construction waste management strategy going to be to grind it all up and recycle it? And miraculously, this was like the first of just a litany of steps in this chain, right? Links in the chain. Todd Phillips, the demolition subcontractor, got intrigued by this idea of, gosh, maybe we could put together a list of all the materials that could be salvaged out of this building and start distributing it to nonprofits all across Atlanta. And then he ended up, partnering with me to spend 4 months, scheduling appointments with nonprofits to come and look at materials. And, that's where it started. And we salvaged 62 tons of building materials and gave it to 19 organizations, and it was worth almost $400,000. And after that, I started asking, if one building could do that, okay, something's broken. If that isn't, normal, that process is not normal, what do we need to do to make it more normal?
All I hear in that too is it took one person to just raise their hand and go, what if we don't do it that way? And then another person would be like, I'm open. Let's iterate, let's collaborate. And that process begins very simply, is very complicated, I'm sure, in execution, but ultimately does start. There's that moment though. In that work, that's even where I bring up that moment of courage, where it's like, it does take that initial moment to just go, can I question this? Do I have enough security in what I believe and where I think my team is to go just hey, just crazy idea here. And so that's just a call out for anybody that's listening to just raise your hand and ask that question. That's a part, we talk about that sort of mind shift where that's becoming, the crazy irony here is it's almost like it always has been kind of a traditional mindset where people go, oh yeah, why don't we do that? But then also we don't do it enough. What evidence have you seen since 2009 that we are, societally progressing in the right direction, culturally progressing in the right direction, even with barriers that keep ebbing and flowing in the progress of material reuse?
Absolutely. I'm going to answer that in a couple of different ways. I don't want this to come off in any way negative. If I look at the day-to-day reality of the reuse industry, such as, our organization, Lifecycle Building Center, there is a part of me that is surprised that the process is still as hard as it is all these years later, 15 years later, and that it's still as much of a struggle to grow this infrastructure and these practices. I personally think that part of why is because it's really inherent, and I'm going to put on a different hat. So I'm taking off the Lifecycle Building Center hat and putting on the Build Reuse National Nonprofit for the Industry hat. 5 years ago when Build Reuse rebranded from Building Materials Reuse Association to be Build Reuse, that was done intentionally because the challenges that exist, the brokenness that exists right in these processes has to be solved collaboratively across the sectors, industries, all of the members of the ecosystem that creates, manages, and removes, has to work together to change how those processes function. So what I would say is I think that why it's still so hard and why, an organization like mine, the struggle is still as intense as it is because we haven't yet gotten to a state where all the different members of the ecosystem, whether it's reuse organizations and that infrastructure, technology has a role in terms of, access to information about opportunities and how do you better connect, supply and demand, specifiers, so architects, engineers, contractors, clients, building owners, developers, could go on. They have to all work together. I'm really excited when I see organizations like Living Future working their butts off to bring all of those members of the ecosystem together to figure these things out. Mindful Materials, there are so many organizations that have, just rolled up their sleeves and are bringing, even product manufacturers, I didn't even say that. They have an important role to play, right? So on the side of, feeling hopeful and excited So that's part of that. But I also have seen a dramatic shift. If I look back when I worked at Perkins and Will and up through 2012, when I went to Greenbuild, when I went to the Living Future Conference, and, before or when LBC was Lifecycle Building Center was first being formed, the sense for me at that time was that's, okay, that sounds really cool, good luck with that. All those years ago, right? And then I sort of left the, designer AEC community. I mean, connected through relationships, partnerships, board members, etc., but wasn't directly in it. And essentially, through my current role with Build Reuse on the board, in 2023, I came back into that realm. Build Reuse, decided to, through the support of Mannington, product manufacturer, Build Reuse had the opportunity to participate in the expo at Greenbuild. And I cannot tell you, basically 10, 11 years have passed, the intensity with which I was met as somebody who understood the AEC world, right? Who had gone into the reuse world, for a decade-ish. And I came back and I was met with this, intensity of desire and interest in being able to specify reclaimed building products. It was jarring. And the reason it was jarring is because for, over a decade, I've been on the other side, so to speak, in Atlanta trying to create more thriving infrastructure, getting an understanding on a national scale through Build Reuse of the existing, landscape of reuse infrastructure. It seemed like such a bizarre disconnect between the reality day-to-day on the ground of our industry and our organizations and how just incredibly difficult the day-to-day struggle has been with, oh my gosh, we want this so bad for our projects. And so ever since then, so it's been about a year and a half since it was exciting and terrifying at the same time, right? Ever since then, that's my focus is how do there's such a huge opportunity that exists in that gap. And, Garr, folks like you, Sabira, folks like you at Repley, I'm excited, particularly through Build Reuse, to strengthen what already exists, what we've already started, to, work more collaborative with Living Future, with Mindful Materials, with you all, and figure this out together. It's the only way forward. To me.
What I love about your answer is it speaks to that there isn't an active resistance necessarily. We might have a decrease in funding mechanisms. There might be which we can talk about, there might be a potential lack of cohesion sometimes. I think that but it's not for the lack of trying. It's just for the lack of how many stakeholders might be involved and the complication that comes in coordination with so many stakeholders. But that speaks to, again, that the will is there. We're seeing an increase of essentially that willingness to participate in these very complex conversations and systems, but that isn't for the faint of heart. And you almost have to go into it going, I know this is complicated. I know that this is against the grain of how easy it is to throw something away, but how worth it is to try to collaborate and connect. Again, not a complex system of also varying size players, which also then brings a degree of difficulty to the conversation. And so I love hearing that that's where you can go and tap into that community through Mindful Materials, through Green Build, through Build Reuse, through Living Futures, that there are people that are organizing in order to facilitate that conversation and continue and move that conversation along.
Can we get geeky for a second?
Please, let's get geeky.
I was thinking about this morning. Build Reuse, Garr, I know you already know about this, Sabira, you might know, has actually successfully secured our $6.7 million EPA grant to create environmental product declarations for reclaimed construction materials, which is amazing. So this is also part of why I'm excited, right? Opens up all kinds of opportunities for the types of work and conversations, collaboration to happen. And so Lifecycle Building Center is one of the organizations, figuring out how are we going to integrate data collection, and tracking in our organization to support the generation of of EPDs. And it's gotten us thinking and talking about how one member, for example, of the ecosystem, product manufacturers, could support pieces of this process. It's gotten me thinking about, I'm just very focused on, like, how do we make all of this easier? I know that, none of us alone are going to have solutions, but like, how do we start thinking about, well, what are we after? What do we need? What do we want? Right. And I keep thinking about, for example, just one material stream, carpet tile. Let's just talk about that for a second. Pretty easy to, collect, organize, list on a, online platform.
It's dense, so it's easy to aggregate. Yeah, it's easy to aggregate.
Yeah, you can get high volume, get huge impact. So just within that one example material category for a second, we were having a conversation this morning about figuring out which material categories we at Lifecycle Building Center want to track data for as one of the first phase efforts for this build reuse grant. And I'm thinking about all the carpet manufacturers in Georgia, and I'm thinking about conversations that I've had about, a question came up in this discussion this morning about, it'd be really helpful if we understood the age of the product that's been removed. We're looking at, how does the material get removed and then transported to the processing facility, i.e. Lifecycle Building Center? What's the equipment that's being used once it's here? What's the energy source, that fuels that equipment? But today was the first day I was even really thinking about, trying to understand and track the age of the product, right? And so that got me thinking, well, I've had conversations with carpet manufacturers, and one of the questions that I got back about the idea of embedding, a little chip or something, that has data in the product, what's the upside for the manufacturer, right? And then I start thinking, how much do we want circularity? Because I don't know. I mean, maybe there is an easy way to work with, say, for example, a product manufacturer to develop a system that allows the reuse industry at large to get access to some data that makes this whole process not only easier, but just work better, right? Have more complete data, basically, right? It doesn't, as a reuse practitioner, make a whole lot of sense to me to, as we embark on this journey with EPDs, to have to do a whole ton of sleuthing to figure out data that already exists that can be just built into the process from the beginning, right? I don't know. I'm not trying to advocate for regulation, but I'm just asking that question. What would it take to incentivize product manufacturers to participate in a process where there is an embedded, thing that data can be.
Yeah.
I'll stop.
We've got, but let's geek out. Yeah.
Honestly, we've really struggled with this. And I think there's the push and pull of demand. There is, if the customer, if you as the Lifecycle Building Center are not seen as a customer, right? You're playing an ecosystem role.
Is what we basically.
Yeah.
Essentially. Yeah.
But you're not the first buying customer of that carpet tile. And so the first customer, if they want their product that comes out of their building that they purchased to have an ongoing life beyond what they purchased, and then they put pressure on the manufacturers to ask for the data. That's kind of one pull. That's something that, we've come across. And the manufacturer will still want to know, okay, how many other customers want it? It doesn't matter if it's a big customer. It doesn't matter if it's just, somebody important. But there's that. And the other is, there could be an opportunity if the manufacturer is willing to incorporate circular business models. And some of them have, right? I know carpet tile have been kind of at the forefront of building materials and having a willingness to take back materials. But if they're not seeing the economic value from that or the adoption, then they start to be get cold on the whole thing. And digital transformation, adding that data to your systems or a system, is not an easy undertaking. That is an investment that the manufacturer has to make. And so they're just trying to figure out why. I keep thinking
if one manufacturer, would be willing to pilot, and, I can say that for example, with carpet tile, I have had conversations with folks who just theoretically have discussed past efforts to look at the concept of materials as a service instead of, one-time transactional product, and the pros and cons of that model. It just feels like the kind of thing that, I don't know, I'm just really hopeful that there can be a scenario where we can try things like that, even on a smaller scale, and learn from it, and maybe over time convince other manufacturers of the value. Maybe there's value components that, even as we're sitting here today, of doing this type of work that we're not even fully aware of, that we won't know to do it.
Yeah, and I'm still struck by your question of, do we even want circularity?
Or how much do we want it?
Or how much do we want it? And where that takes me is the real fear that I know manufacturers have of cannibalization of their new sales.
Yes.
And so ultimately that is the real, and Sabira, you were speaking of that chicken and the egg scenario a little bit, where there's a lot of manufacturers that go, this is a great program. We love circular economy programs because we build service revenue into our circular economy systems and sales structure.
Right.
And so for those manufacturers, it's working. They built it in, they worked it out with their distributors, these take back systems, they have that framework set up. For the manufacturers that are considering doing this in the 21st century, they're going, this is freaky. I don't know how to start. I don't know where to start first. And I think the question's very valid as it goes, well, do you start and learn, or do you try to learn and then start? And that can be almost a paralysis of which do we go, because there are expenses on either side of that equation of what are you paying for and what's the risk. And so ultimately that's where those are the big questions. And Sabira and I have talked with many a manufacturer about those exact questions. And so to your point, it's extremely valid, is how do you influence with a nice now experimental pot of money that's going toward a good use of trying to figure out these EPDs? How do you influence the system to go, hey, we're here to try to figure out a nice, reasonable solution to learn from, and then scale that from there? And I think that's a really powerful effort to start to take on.
I do have to also say that one of the other things that really excites me right now for our industry, and in particular through this EPD project, is the way in which inherently working with our current structures, 100 organizations, right, over 5 years, to collect this data and generate hundreds of EPDs. That process inherently will allow our industry to have a much clearer understanding of collectively what we're actually capturing, what the economic value is. And even in some cases, we might be able to take it deeper than just economic value. And I want to gain an understanding. I had this really interesting conversation actually at the most recent Green Build about the notion of using better systems and processes around data of material flows to look not just at economic benefit, but social benefit.
Absolutely.
And thinking about that in terms of certification programs that are trying to understand, measure, document, encourage,
I love that point, because again, the reverse flow of data is helpful for a manufacturer, yes, to understand economic value, but if there is, just speaking frankly, a marketing value to that social data where they can say, hey, this is what we're doing. I've actually found too that for astute manufacturers who have a voice in their community, that also there is a significant undervalue to having that data and then going and talking to their local governments and saying, look at what this can do for our economy locally.
Yeah.
We are supporting this. Now, whatever they want to use that information for and talking with the governments, none of my business. But ultimately, it's still proving an outcome that says, hey, there are intangible or less economic values that are helping the communities. And I would actually love to center that back at a question to you of what have you found in co-founding Lifecycle Building Center, where you all get to point at these economic, but then also societal benefits that you're providing in terms of either workforce development or community development that sort of speak to that for the role that you all play in Atlanta?
Absolutely. The simplest form of where that began in our journey had to do with donating materials to other nonprofits. That's our nonprofit material match program. And what I'd love to do to connect the dots between what we were just talking about, what you're asking now, is just highlight the opportunity to, through improved systems and maybe some overlay of technology, much more easily and at scale, be able to report back to, for example, material donors information about the effect that their decision and behavior has had on other charitable organizations in their community, that connects them to, the stories of impact that those organizations are having because of their support. For example, we donated materials to, I think, 54 nonprofits last year, valued at about $180,000, right? So those organizations were able to avoid those costs. That is a drop in the bucket of what could be done. There's just no doubt about it. The other piece that is a little bit newer to us at Lifecycle Building Center, very significant across the industry as a whole, is workforce development. So, for example, the same system that could more readily help either a material donor or even just a member of the community understand the scale of social benefit that comes from this process. Because when we talk about how much do we want circularity, part of why I ask that question is because I know that there isn't a clear enough or deep enough understanding of what the benefits even are, because the impacts that are already happening from our industry are not seen sufficiently, understood. That's part of what I meant when I said that the EPA grant will shed light on that. And so what I will offer is that, you asked earlier about where things are headed, how things have evolved, right? In addition to the EPD grant from EPA, we are also working on another initiative that I'm very excited about that kind of marries the two things I just said, which is nonprofit impact, that social benefit, and workforce development. So this is a program that builds on work that Lifecycle Building Center was involved with in partnership with Skanska at the Candida Building project at Georgia Tech, which was the first living building in Georgia. And we were able to reclaim dimensional lumber from film sets and use workforce development to create nail laminated timber panels. And so Lifecycle Building Center, 5 years later, launched a program to scale that so that we could test out ideas of developing new construction products, remanufacturing salvaged dimensional lumber for new construction products, specifically for affordable housing, and using workforce training at each step. So doing workforce development in the material reclamation, in the remanufacturing, and the deployment of those new construction products into housing projects. So that's an example.
That's a pretty great example. It seems like it hits on a lot of great notes.
For the workforce.
Sorry.
Yeah. And what's great, is like the workforce development part, like when you start to think about the intersection of technology and humans, right? Like there's like the data piece that will help in decision making. And then there's the humans that actually have to execute on the decisions. And I think there's opportunity for scale in both. And could you kind of share your vision for what, this one project, you have X impact with workforce development, but, if we were trying to we're deconstructing buildings and reusing materials across the nation, like what could that mean for our workforce?
We could create a lot of jobs. When it comes to economic, it's obviously a cross section between economic and societal impacts and benefits. And it's not just about deconstruction either. And that's what, when I was sharing that example of reclaiming, remanufacturing, and, generating new buildings, right? That is important because, especially this is something, for us here in the Southeast, there's not a lot of games in town, so to speak, doing deconstruction, right? So it's twofold. Because the material reuse industry, deconstruction as a practice is still so new, it is not an easy enterprise to, I'm just going to put it more simply. If you're training people in this current environment to only do deconstruction, you're doing those individuals to some extent a disservice because the market has not yet risen to the level where there's just like a plentiful number of deconstruction only jobs, right? So it doesn't make sense to train people in something where the market isn't ready to fully support their ability to thrive in that as an industry, right? So that's one reason to cross train in deconstruction and construction. But beyond that, there's also a significant advantage in, and I use this word somewhat jokingly, but I'm not totally joking, in essentially infiltrating all of the related industries that are part of creating the built environment with the knowledge, understanding, experience, skills of deconstruction, of reuse, to change behaviors within those industries. Does that make sense?
You need more people that are knowledgeable enough to raise their hand and go, there might be a different way we can do this.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. So that's part of why that is so important. It's so much better. This is going to evolve over time. Maybe in 20 years, there will be a world where there'll be so many organizations, companies doing nothing but deconstruction that you can just train people in deconstruction. It is not that way today. And I think it's going to be a long time before it looks that way.
Well, the scary aspect of that, I mean, this is something I wrestle with, and it's not, we can talk about it, we can not talk about it. It's the environment of tariffs, what that could mean for commodity reuse of materials internal domestically to our economy.
An argument that actually strengthens the case for reuse.
Yes.
Okay.
But that's I'm not
saying I'm advocating for tariffs.
No. That's what I'm saying. It's like that
business.
is no. It's nor mine. But I think there is a reality of which I struggle with. I'll put my cards on the table. Current administrative practices in our government, in which then tariffs are a part of this bigger picture. But I look at that and go, okay, but that's, while geopolitically complicated, and I want the United States to be getting along more with our partners and allies. This is a reckoning for us to deal with our own domestic supply chains and do it in a way where reuse is advocated for in our industry. Now, that's going to fly in the face of a lot of different things that other people of that administration can't buy into, maybe, but I think it should. And I think it should be considered because there's a workforce development angle that we can talk about. There's reuse. There's a more efficient uses of materials that we have domestically. And I think it's just a fascinating problem set. Yeah.
So this is, I think, a good opportunity for us to maybe shift the conversation a little.
Yeah,
because I genuinely
go for it.
Want to hear from both of you your thoughts on this. Personally, I think there's a really strong case to be made that, to your point, Garr, what reuse is doing as an industry is not antithetical to a lot of the goals of the current administration. I think there's sorry. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I guess I'll try to say this quickly and then shut up so that you guys can talk, but I really am bothered by the idea that we as a country in the United States are so deeply divided that, we can't get along and work together and collaborate and, have common goals. And the reason I'm saying that is because if I have learned nothing else in the last 15 years, it's that every single day in this industry of reuse, I see how this process helps folks who may just think they disagree about a lot of stuff. I'll give you an example. Folks who may say, I don't believe in climate change, or I don't support, the concept of environmental sustainability, whatever, right? I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that is part of a belief system they have about themselves, right? And they enthusiastically, unequivocally participate in the process of reuse. I love that. I love the fact that what we do is so commonsensical that, I really want this to be one of the places, reuse to be one of the realms where we can undo some of what I see as a false premise, which is that we disagree on, folks that see themselves as, politically disparate, have so much that they don't agree on, that it's impossible to bring, folks from different political viewpoints together. I know it's not true because I see it every day.
Yeah. I think as we round out our time together, I actually think that's very hopeful. And I'm really grateful that you brought that up, because the motivation, if you take out the like aspiration or the outcome of environmental impact and you just think about the community piece, which we kind of started off this conversation on, is if that's the outcome of stronger communities, more resilient communities, you get the cherries on top of the climate impact, but you have workforce development, you have economic gains, you're saving, you're not spending unnecessarily, you're supporting your country by using what we already have.
And
All of
jobs,
these are
domestic
net gains.
jobs.
Yeah, jobs and workforce. All of these are net gains that you can share very clearly without talking about climate or environment at all. And yeah, they can be, if those are cherries on top to a group of people, great. Or it's even not a cherry on top that don't even need to know about it, fine. And I think that really is out of all of the sustainability storytelling that's out there and the wide range of it, circularity is kind of like a place where you can get away with not talking about the environmental impact.
And can I just say
really
something?
Beautiful.
Because when we use the word sustainability, I don't know, maybe this is like grossly oversimplified. For me, I feel like sustainability has gotten such a bad rap, because for me, what I want sustainability to mean is just doing what makes sense. That's all I want. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes I deal with this all the time where people are like, well, what is sustainability? And I just have to take it back to its original pillars, which is to say, we're trying to figure out business models that are environmentally, social, and economically beneficial. And people tend to drop the economic part of that, I think, in favor of social and environmental, because the economic part is what we're so used to and it's so natural to us. But ultimately, I agree. I think that sometimes can confuse an audience into thinking that this is only environmental, only social. I think I love your message of reuse is apolitical. Reuse is so foundational to who we are that it seems to, again, cross anybody's belief systems. And that might just be because we all just like a deal. And so that might also be the case, that there might be a deal inherent to reuse that people can just identify with. I think, to answer your question in terms of how I feel in this, I think there's a way that we can go about reuse, a re-domestication of manufacturing, a more efficient economy through reuse. We can go through that without sort of alienating ourselves away from our neighbors. And I mean our neighbors politically. And that's where I disagree with how we get to it. But I hope maybe we still can get to a more efficient economy through reuse. And we've seen the success. We've seen the success on two spectrums. Apple does reuse, and they do small little gadgets of consumer electronics. And then on the biggest side of our economy, we've got like somebody like Caterpillar, and they make $1 million giant pieces of equipment. They do reuse. So the business case is there, but there's a gray area in between those success stories where we haven't quite figured it out yet at scale. And that's where we're living in, is trying to figure out where we exist in that spectrum of building materials, of appliances, of cars, and different whatever types of cars actually we nailed. So I guess we nailed down the reuse of cars pretty well. But I think that's where I love thinking about the spectrum of solutions, and we're just trying to figure out the middle of them right now.
Well, I have to lift up something you said, Garr, because
yeah.
I don't think that for buildings, right? I don't think that we get to that future state without being open to working with folks that we may disagree on other things. Does that make sense? Like, if
Absolutely.
we are not willing to let some things go and enthusiastically, without hesitation or reservation, get in rooms, get on calls, work together, we're not going to get to that future state. We have to, you mentioned cars, right? I guarantee you that has required that. You know what I'm saying? What I mean?
Yes.
It's like,
yes.
You can't say, only and this is a silly thing to say, only the tree huggers are going to, work together to create this new, system.
Nope, you're exactly right. As we do round this out, where do you place most of your hope going forward? Is it in collaboration? Is it continuing to drive that conversation?
Yes, we cannot do it alone. It's actually, the best thing about being a part of the reuse industry is that spark of excitement that people get, when they see, how something has made the world better, how this process has somehow made the world better. Somebody's life, has been better because of it. That feel good, connecting to the deepest parts of who we are and how nature works. Like it's inherent in this process. And so I love the working with our community and everyone who may not have seen themselves initially as part of the quote unquote reuse community. And that tent just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's awesome.
Gotta love a big tent arena there. And that's reuse. Thank you, Shannon. It was lovely. Lovely to talk to you and hang out again since the first time we did it 3 years ago. Think about more reuse, folks. That's it. Go talk to more people about it. That's all I got. And our audience knows that. So whoever's hearing this for the first time, go have that conversation. Thanks for the time, Shannon.
Thank you.